Uh-oh. Michael? Oh, here we go. There we go. Go.
I'm Victor Tiffany.
I'm Kelly Lane.
And I'm Brian Ramirez.
And this is the Revolutionary Roundtable. This week's episode is Election Integrity. We have a very special guest coming up tonight. I'm so excited to be talking to this gentleman soon. But before we bring him on, let me just make a few announcements. Next week's guest will be Lisa McCormick, running for U.S. Senate in New Jersey. We're going to have a normal 6-question interview with her. And afterwards, we're going to bring on Johnny Axum. You may know Johnny. He's been on this channel a few times now. He's had a conversion in terms of the answer to the question, what are you, a tax and spend liberal? He's got the right answer now. And we'll have a discussion in the aftermath of our interview with Lisa as to the answer to that question. I'm looking forward to that as well. This week, we got Ryan Trundle, candidate for Congress, became our most recent CFAR candidate. So fresh, in fact, we don't even have him on the website yet, but we'll have him up soon enough. And then, before we bring on our guests, I just want to I want to elaborate a little bit on theory and practice. What does it mean, theory and practice? The theory that we're working on, the theory that we worked on in 2016 was called leverage. In other words, we called it Bernie or bust, right? It's leverage. If it's not Bernie, then we're not going to support the nominee. Think of it as a line in the sand, right? This time around, it's CFAR or else. Sign the contract for American renewal or else we're not going to support you. It's a line in the sand. So if I could, please, encourage everybody, go out and buy this book. You can Google, or not Google, but enter into your browser, bernieorbust.info, I-N-F-O. Get this book and read it, and you'll understand exactly what we're doing, what we did in 2016, and then, of course, again, this year with the midterms, this CFAR or else strategy. So we have tonight a very well-informed man on the question and the subject of election integrity. He's the national coordinator for the Citizen Oversight Project and an electrical engineer, as I understand it, Ray Lutz. Ray, thank you for joining us.
Oh, okay, thank you. I was trying to get my audio worked up there. Thanks for having me.
Yes, thank you very much, Ray. This topic, I think, is on everyone's minds right now, and we've even got, now we've got politicians talking about it, and hopefully an election integrity bill, our Election Integrity Act of 2017, hopefully will be in place. But I know you have a lot of experience out there in California. You've been battling this in the courts, and I thought maybe you could talk a little bit about the recent developments that you posted, I believe, about a week or so ago.
Yeah, okay. Well, basically, we're still trying to get to the ballots from the primary of 2016. We noticed that there was quite a bit of difference between the early vote by mail ballots that come in before the election night. That's about half of the vote by mail ballots. And then the other half of the vote by mail ballots come in, they either come in before then or within the next 3 days, but they have to be postmarked by election day. But they're not processed by election night. So at 8 o'clock, when those first figures appear, those are the early vote by mail ballots. That was the only set where Hillary Clinton won by a big landslide. And the other sets of ballots, either Bernie Sanders won or it was a toss-up. And it's kind of, we thought, very unusual that there would be such a big difference. Usually there's a bit of a difference because, the voters that vote early are maybe a little bit more conservative. They're the voters that have got everything lined up so they can do it right versus the people that come at the last minute or vote at the, by mail later. And so, and then maybe the campaigns could have a really good get out the early vote by mail campaign. However, it was completely flipped. So Hillary Clinton won by something like 58 to 42% in the early vote by mail ballots, but in the polling place ballots, Bernie Sanders won 58 to 42 or something like that. So it was completely flipped. So, but in the right after the election, or when they were processing it, we sued the registrar of voters for not including the later vote by mail ballots and the provisional ballots, which account for 37% of the ballots, in the audit process. And so it says in the election law, 1% of the precincts and vote by mail ballots. If 1% means 1% of everything, not 1% of part of it. So we asked them to do it and to include more of the precincts of the ballots in the later vote by mail and the provisional part. He said no. So then we took him to court and we won. And so that was like, whoop, yeah, yay, we won. Okay, it's both sides appealed, so it's in the appeal process now. And we're saying that they should include all the vote by mail ballots and the provisionals. They say they don't want to include any of them, and the later ones. And then we had a sneaky move by this group called CASIO, which is the California Association of Clerks and Elections Officials. So that's all the elections officials get together and sort of plot and conspire about what they want to do to, in this case, gut the election audit process and make it legal to not include all of those later ballots in the audit. So they passed sneakily AB 840. They did that by having another bill that had nothing to do with it, the 1% manual tally audit. And it actually had to do with signatures on vote by mail ballots that everybody agreed with. And then August 20th or something, they modified that by adding a whole additional section to the bill at the bottom, which was suddenly about 1% manual tallies. We got wind of it, did all we could to try to stop this thing, but they passed it. This was done by Dean Logan, the clerk of Los Angeles, which is by far the largest district in the nation. It's about 5 times bigger than, well, at least 3 times bigger than San Diego, which is, well, the next largest, in California, we're number 2, but the next largest in the nation is Maricopa County, which is the Phoenix area. But anyway, that big county, Dean Logan and then Jill Levine, who is the Sacramento registrar, they both pushed this thing through to make it legal. And we're still seeing the repercussions of that. Just today, I guess it was yesterday, I got the notice of a bill that is being pushed through now called AB 2125, which is to change the 1% manual tally audit and make it a risk, what they call a risk limiting audit. And the usual kind of classical way of doing the risk limiting audit is that you pull individual ballots out and you compare them with the paper ballots and you add up the total, how it's going for in the election. And if you take a good enough random sample, then it should be representative of the end result. It's kind of like a good analogy is if you have a big pot of soup and you stir it really well, you can just take a little teaspoon out and sample it to see how salty it is. You don't have to sample very much if you stir it up enough. So that's the randomness of getting it. The hard part about doing this random thing, for me anyway, is first of all, I don't trust the elections officials to do this. I don't trust them at all. And I don't trust them to do anything right, even if they want to do it right, because they just don't understand it very well. And if you ask them to do something that's statistics, high-end statistics and a procedure that now we have to try to follow, we see these election officials cutting corners left and right, middle, back, everywhere that they can. And they just act like it's nothing. I mean, Jill Levine, the person that put this through, she's supposed to choose random precincts. So you're supposed to use dice or some other way. We like them to use dice and a list. That's a good way to do it. She just says, well, I'm going to choose them randomly by my own selection. I just choose the ones that I want. That's random. And I choose the ones I think will do the best job. Well, we don't trust her to choose the ones. Then this guy here, Michael Vu in San Diego, used to be in Cuyahoga County, Ohio. In 2004, he was in charge of the election where George W. Bush beat out John Kerry. And there, we know that the Diebold guy says, I'm going to deliver Ohio for you. There was all kinds of stuff going on with the elections machines. And there people that were supposed to do the recount audit that process, what they discovered was the ballots were, Bush, 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 Bush for the first set, and then all the rest Kerry. Like, this would never happen in real life. They don't just order themselves like that. They're going to be mixed up. And they said, how did they get like this? And they said, well, we admit that we pre-counted them because we wanted it to make sure that it matched the results, so we didn't have to do any more work. Well, the idea is you're looking for a problem. You're not trying to make it match. And so what they would do is they would just put in the ballots as needed so that it would match up, so that the total was right. It's just, this is how stupid they are. And so when you hear these people like Padilla, the Secretary of State of California, who says, nothing happened in the election. We know that it's all solid. Complete BS, because he doesn't know. And what he does know is that he was behind a lot of the rigging in terms of AB 840, which was to get out of the rest of the, doing the full audit. What we want, let me just tell you what we want. We want to get everybody to use ballot images that is taking a snapshot of both sides of the ballot and making those images available for the public to review. If I can get all of those images to review, look, there's no personal information. In fact, the ballot gets thrown out if you have your signature or something on it. And I've seen them do this. We saw them do it up in Minnesota. I think it was Minnesota where Al Franken was elected. They had the website where they went through each ballot. You could see the ballots. Look, we can run our own machines across these ballots and count them, all of them. We don't have to do a sample. We can test the whole thing.
Now, do you think it's important, though, to keep the copies, the paper ballots? Because I know in Tim Canova's race, they did have these scanned images, but they had tossed out the paper ballots, like something, I believe it was 12 months before they were legally supposed to. But then, there was some question about what company is scanning these ballots, and you don't have a paper ballot to compare it to anymore. So what are your thoughts on that about?
Well, you're right. You have to have the paper ballot to check it, but there's also ways to what they call make the images immutable, so that using a thing such as, it's similar to the blockchain that you've heard about that's used in these cyber currencies. But basically, we don't have to have it the glamour of the blockchain, because we can just lock it up, because we have all of the data there, and you just lock it up and you make it public right away. If the images are made public, and yes, we have to go in and take a sample and compare them. And there's procedures for doing this that have been around for years. There's the organization AIM, which is an association, or it's the Association for Image and Information Management. They dealt with the microfiche archiving, and basically they were on top of all of this image processing of documents. They have a system where here's how you compare an image with the base document and make sure that it's copying right, doesn't have streaks in it, looks good in the fidelity. They have comparison of characteristics. Those procedures are already there. And as you're making these copies, you have people that look at a sample every now and then to make sure that the scans are doing right. But you also need to go back in and take a look. But that's kind of yes. But if I have all of the images and I can look at those, it takes quite a bit of work to fake out the images. And if they know that we can go back in and check the paper against those, then yes, I think we have a pretty solid system. Even if I can't trust them to do the risk limiting audits can be good. They're just starting to try to get into these. And the concept behind the risk limiting audit is that that unlike what they do now, which is where they take a set sample, at least California has some pretty good audits. I mean, we're talking about Canova down in Florida. There, they only choose one race and one race and 1% of the precincts of that race. And what race did they choose? The one I went to where they tried to look like pocket the thing and fake out which one they were choosing. You should see the video at Citizens Oversight on YouTube. It looked to me like they were trying to you know, basically sleight of hand, put in the right, and they ended up with a judge, you know, with no challenger. That's the race that they're gonna, you know. So choosing just one race isn't enough. You need to at least get the important race, in this case, the presidential race to look at. But just doing one, if they do it randomly, that can scare off, you know, people that are trying to fix the thing. If it's chosen randomly, and then people that are trying to fix the election will say, well, I don't know which one I'm going to choose. But if they choose it, say, randomly and don't publish the results they had, this is what they were doing in Fresno. Yeah, they pick it randomly, but they publish which ones they're choosing 2 months ahead of the election. Well, then if you're a hacker, you just say, well, let's fix the rest of them. Leave those the way they are. They'll come in and audit those. They'll look fine, and we'll fix the rest of it. Why would you publish it 2 months ahead of time unless you wanted to just really screw it up? I mean, you know, and that is if you don't understand it, why you're doing it. So this is why, you know, Fresno was choosing 2 months ahead of time. Sacramento was choosing them randomly, but the ones she wanted. Then San Diego and many other counties were leaving out 40% of the ballots from the audit. Just so badly run. So this is the thing. They're supposed to audit themselves. This is like, well, when I go down the freeway and I'm speeding, I'm going to check my speedometer, and if it's over, I'm going to write myself a ticket. You know, this doesn't happen very much. Which election official is going to say, my system is screwed up? So Los Angeles does this. They have a really bad election system. They're terrible. It has these cards that look like punch cards. You fill in the bubble with a pencil, and many times it just doesn't read it very well. Well, so they do the 1% sample of the precincts. They bring them in and hand count them. Okay, then if the count is matching, of course they say that's right. If it's only 1, 2, or 3 votes off in the precinct, they report it. But if it's more than that, they don't report it right away. They take the precinct ballots back into another room. I've watched them do this and even asked them, is this what you're doing here? He says, yeah, look, here's what we're doing. We highlight the votes throughout the votes on the ballot, run them back through the scanner, and then get the new report. Don't even look at the old one anymore. Look at the new report and compare that with the result. It's always going to match. But if it does, and it doesn't match the original, that actually means maybe the computer was fixed, and finally you're getting the good result here from the scan. The original one, it was off, maybe because the central tabulator figures were all fixed. If we find just one precinct that's off by 10, that means that maybe there's 1,000 precincts off by 10 that somebody went in there and just made that change. That's 10,000 flipped. That means 20,000 new voters in for one of the candidates, and moving that by 20,000. It can really change the election. So they actually do it wrong. I just sent Dean Logan, who's the registrar of voters in Los Angeles, a letter saying, look, you're doing this wrong. Don't do this anymore. Because, so, you know, with that knowledge of how they're implementing the current audit, do I have any confidence that they're going to do this new, more statistical audit very well at all? No, not at all. And so we're going to have to watch it very, very carefully. And as I said, if I had the images, then I could very easily run those images across my own software and check it. The problem is here, we've been trying to get at the ballots from the primary all this time. We have 22 months to do it. We still have them. Right now we're in a holding pattern because we've made an official request for production of evidence in the case. And they have until the next hearing is going to be May 10th. You know, so theoretically they could have already destroyed the ballots before we even get to look at them. So the election laws in California are so old, they're like the 1800s. They've been migrated up, but recent laws like the Public Records Act and the new constitutional amendment, that was a 2004, I think, saying that we had the right to look at the documents. There is no exclusion for ballots. We should be able to look at them, but it says that they're sealed. So they keep them for 22 months by law, sealed, so no one can look at them. It's like, why do you keep them? The reason that you're keeping them is so that people can look at them and check what you do. Mm-hmm. Oh my God, they absolutely do not want that to happen. Can you imagine what happens if the public actually gets to come in and check how badly they're doing? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. They want to hush this. They want people like Alex Padilla to say, everything's fine, we don't have it. Even Obama says, oh, you're crazy if you think the elections could be fixed in this country. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You know, but it looks like there's a lot wrong with what's happening.
Well, what you were describing, do you know a woman named Laura Chamberlain? She's in Chicago.
Yeah, Dr. Laura. Mm-hmm.
Oh, yes. I actually met her in Philly DNC week and ended up marching around town with her. And she told me all about what she witnessed there. And it sounds similar, like where they had a tally and she witnessed people like marking and changing it to match.
They would be hand tallying, and when they got up to a certain point, they would be ordered to stop.
And they were erasing.
And then so that it would match. And so, this Chicago is where she's from, and Chicago City is a whole district unto itself, and it's just as corrupt as hell. But there's a good news there because they're getting ballot images in, and with those images. And if we get to them, like there's a county, Dane County in Wisconsin, did publish all of their ballot images for the November election. The Election Assistance Administration, Commission, I guess it is, they acknowledge that ballots are public records and we should be able to get at them. So I think it's just a matter of time before we get this straightened up. But always, and there's no choice here. The public, the citizenry, has to watch the elections ourselves. You can't trust the elections officials or those who've been elected to do it. The people that have been elected, they like it screwed up the way it is because they got in. Mm-hmm. And so they're not going to ever go after it. The media, amazingly, does not ever really get involved in this research on the elections. It's like taboo for them to question if the elections are legitimate. And so they don't really do it. Mm-hmm. They've been following, the cases. I mean, we won the lawsuit, so you have to admit that we had something right here. Mm-hmm. But generally, I haven't found that they just don't. They're not investigating. They don't go in there with their cameras and watch them what they're doing, or really do any kind of in-depth investigation. It doesn't happen. Mm-hmm. But Dr. Laura, she's great and a good person that I know, have talked to many times. There's a lot of good election, election activists, but not all. I mean, some of them have been distracted and they're not looking at the right thing. In fact, when I first started doing election integrity, people were telling me that what I consider the wrong thing to do for so long, and we weren't looking. And it took me like 2 years to even figure out what they were doing in San Diego because they didn't publish any procedures. I thought it was going to be easy. Okay, I'll just go in and look at their procedures and kind of understand what they're doing. Okay, I get your set of written procedures and I'll go over them. Oh, we don't have any. What? No written procedures for what you do? No, but you can ask us questions. And so I had to do that for like 2 years. Okay, you ask the question, you say, we want clarification. We don't understand your question, blah, blah, blah. Around and around and around until finally I realized that these audits were really the key to trying to keep track of it. And then I set up this thing called the snapshot protocol. The reason for that is because they were taking just the early vote by mail ballots and the polling place ballots and doing their audit on that subset. And then we only could get the report for the final report. So there was no way to compare. And then we said, well, we have to get that report that sort of snapshot of the election. So that's what we call it, the snapshot protocol. We get that data and hopefully get the data before they do the random selection so they can't change it. So we get the data first, then they do the random selection, then we compare the data to the result of their 1% manual tallying. At least on that subset, we can find out if there's changes. Now, in this election that we're looking into, we did just exactly that on the early vote by mail ballots, and even the total of ballots was off. The voting was off. And to top it off, let me tell you 2 more things why we're suspect. They used whiteout to white out the ballots a lot. And we said, well, what are your procedures for that? We don't have any. How about reports or logging? None. How about, do you have 2 eyes on it? 2 people watching? No, only 1. But we trust them because they worked here a long time. It's like, really? So they're whiting the ballots out. Then, after we sued this guy, he went in there with 40 people working for a week to rifle through the boxes and pre-stack the precincts up so that they would be able to count them. Completely crazy. And this is why I think we can nail them to the wall if we get these ballots, and that's why they don't want us to get to them. But that's just a snapshot of what's going on. And then there's some other people that maybe you've heard of. John Brakey, who's been going around the country with an attorney trying to get the ballot images to be preserved. And you saw, I think, in Georgia or Alabama, was that the guy with the cowboy hat, can't think of his name right now, but who was the child, the 14-year-old date, he would date the 14-year-olds. They weren't preserving their ballot images there, even though they had them. So this is the kind of thing where now that we're getting the ballot images used, which is a huge resource for us, and now we need to get them to not erase them and let us get to them. So there's a few things here we still need to fix. But key to this is there's many places in the country that are still using machines that don't have any record at all. And places like Ohio, places like, there's so many of the districts there are all what they call the DRE, the direct recording electronic voting machines with no record. You can't tell what happened, and so they can be fixed easily. We need to get to paper ballots that can be counted. I don't mind if they count them by machines, but I need to be able to check it. I need to be able to check the ballots and see what they did later, and I'd love to have the ballot images so it's easy for us to check it.
Now, and also, Brian.
Just real quick, would you say that one way to kind of prevent and to bring more integrity is for concerned citizens in each district to actually, watch as the process takes place, actually be present?
Absolutely. We were trying to do that, and I actually thank you for bringing that up. We have targeted the top 175 counties in the nation. That's what we want to start with. It turns out with just those top 175 out of the some 8,000 districts, you can get 50% of the voters. If you go to 3,000 counties, you get 60. And if you go up to 500 counties, you get 70% of the voters. So we don't have to do all 8,000 districts to do a lot. And in fact, just one person in a state can do an incredible amount by just sending out emails, asking for information. And you have to be a little bit technically inclined to be able to understand the data files that you'll get. They're usually huge, and so you have to be able to parse through those. But we'll help people do that. But going in, I'll tell you, you never know what you're going to find. You have to go in and watch, and they have to let you watch. Okay, they have to let you watch what's going on. You can also close down polls. Right before the polls close, you go in and you say, I'm going to help you close it down. Go to your own polling place right before they close it. They won't let you in right after that. But if you get in there, last 5 minutes, say, I'm going to help you close it, then you can watch everything that they do. My main issue, or let's say a thing that I'm worried about, is not so much what the polling places do. I'm worried about the central tabulator hacking. The potential of a person inside who may be compromised somehow, or a hacker getting in, who then flips, as I said, maybe 1,000 precincts by 10 votes each. You would never be able to find that very easily, but that's 10,000 votes. You can't do that in one precinct. You know, one precinct, you might be able to stuff the ballot box with, like, let's say you stuffed it all for one candidate, right? You're only going to put in 200 ballots there and then throw the other 200 out, you know? And so maybe there's 400 voters in the precinct. You'd be able to flip half of them. That's not going to change the election. And it'd be very hard to do that in a lot of precincts. So that's why and generally precinct workers, you know, maybe there's a few that are out of line, but it's not going to be enough precincts to do. So it's that central tabulator hack that I'm worried about. And that with the audit, you can usually catch that. But definitely if people, citizens oversight, we have citizensoversight.org/signup if you want to sign up, and we'll try to coordinate and train the people to go in and bring your eyes in. You know, one of the most psychologically active images is a set of eyes. We learned just, you know, they photocopied eyes and they put it up next to the, you know, the coffee area, which is an honor system, and the payments went up 3 times just by putting photocopied eye on the wall. So if you bring your eyes in and you're a real person into any of these places, we found also not just elections, but every meeting, every public meeting, get people to go into these meetings, local water, fire, hospital, you know, city council. You'll adopt one of these meetings and go in. They almost have nobody ever attend. Come in and just watch what's happening. Just having your eyes in there makes a big difference. So absolutely, we want people, as I said, you cannot trust the government to watch itself in the elections. They will try to always take advantage of these elections and rig it. Here's one of the good things in this next election coming up. In California and many, well, I think it's 14 other places around the country now have same-day registration. So you can come in on election day and be not registered and still register on site and vote. You know, a lot of people was like, oh, well, gee, 30 days ago I had to register, and I'm, you know, they say, too bad you didn't think ahead, so you can't vote now.
Like in New York.
Yeah, they're still doing it in many places. But in California now, it was actually passed in like 2011. And it's taken this long for them finally to get what they think, you know, well, we had to get our databases fixed and so forth. Finally, they're getting it in place. But that's one of the things that's going to prevent some of the rigging on the front end. So if we fix the actual voting system, then it's like squeezing a balloon, you know, it comes out every other place, and then they're going to be fixed. But if we have same-day registration, then you can't rig the election rolls. There's no, like, it's a fraud, no more voter fraud.
But he's not registered. You do have the problem. Could you talk a little bit about what happened with the provisional ballots out in California? Because I know that I remember hearing that was a big problem, that people got, they ran out of ballots. So they were giving people provisional ballots, and then some people, I think there was something with no party, it no party preference or something, and it was actually a independent party or something to that effect, and then those didn't get counted.
Well, it was because in the primary you had Bernie Sanders being an independent, and you know, a lot of he was a Democratic. You know, on the ballot, but he was an independent, you know, basic. So you had a lot of independent voters coming in, that, you know, non-party preference voters who would come in to vote. And in the primary, it's up to the party to decide if they want to allow crossover voters to vote in their primary. The Republican Party doesn't allow anybody who's not a Republican to vote in their primary. That's up to them. If you're a Democrat, the Democratic ballot was available to non-party preference voters. You could go into the polling place, if you know this, and say, I want the Democratic ballot, therefore it has Bernie Sanders versus Hillary Clinton, or, you know, the rest of those candidates in the Democratic primary on the ballot. If you didn't say that, you would get the nonpartisan ballot that didn't have the presidential race on there. And so they might say, well, wait a second, I wanted to vote for, Hillary Clinton or, you know, Bernie Sanders, probably, if they're the non-party preference, and they said, well, sorry, you're a non-party preference voter, it's not on your ballot. Well, he could have said, yeah, you could ask me for the non-party preference ballot, but unless they said, can you give me the crossover Democratic, unless you said those words exactly, the person in the polling place would go, oh, they're not saying the words exactly right, so we're not going to give them the ballot. And then the question was that we had was, were those ballots being put into the provisional pile and processed last, or were they put into the main pile and processed that night? And what we found was that we did not find evidence in San Diego that they were putting them all in the provisional pile. But what was happening up in Los Angeles is they weren't including those crossover ballots at all. They had to be, with a lawsuit, forced to include those, which was like, it turns out they have 5.5 million voters there in Los Angeles. It's a huge place. And so, you know, you're talking about hundreds of thousands of voters that were being just eliminated from voting, basically, for the presidential primary. So that was a big kerfuffle here. But here's the deal: is that if we have same-day registration, you don't have to worry how you're registered, because you can change it on the spot. You can say, okay, well, what do I need to be voting that way? Oh, you want me to be a Republican? Now I'm a Republican. I can vote in their primary. So the Republicans can't say anymore that you can't vote in our primary unless you're a Republican. You can just change right then. So this eliminates this sort of rigging that was going on. And I don't think it was so much, it partially was because Alex Padilla did not help he did not say, okay, you have to tell people. And even in this last election, Bernie Sanders was on the ballot as a write-in candidate in California for president. That people didn't know, you know, you can only write, you can't just write Mickey Mouse in and you know, they don't total up Mickey Mouse unless probably he'd win, you know, in some election. This is a joke. But they don't total up somebody that's not the official write-in candidate. But Bernie Sanders was an official write-in candidate, but you'd have to know, here's what I can write in. And it wasn't well publicized. So, you know, it's not going to happen unless Bernie Sanders actually was pushing for it, that he would actually win. But still, people wanted an out because they didn't see the other two candidates that were the leaders as being something they wanted to vote for. So, yeah, it was a big deal in California about how that was handled, for sure.
Yeah, and I remember hearing some of it, though, was just they actually ran out of ballots. It wasn't just the crossover. I mean, they were giving people provisional ballots, and those just got tossed to the side. Do you know in LA what ended up happening with those?
Well, the thing is that there's so many different ballot styles. People don't realize this. There's a lot of ballot styles. I think there was 800 here in San Diego, ballot styles. Okay, so what is a ballot style? It means that you have you're in a different area. So in an area you might have, you know, the elementary school district, you know, and then the hospital district and the high school district, you know, bubbles may all intersect in different places compared to the senators and the assemblymen and everything else. So you've got all these different, and so you may have different ballots in these different areas. Then you have all the different languages involved and then the different parties. So in this primary election, you had the full Democratic ballot. You had the crossover Democratic ballot, which did not have the Central Committee races, were the pure Democratic race, which was the Central Committee. Had to be a Democrat to vote for those. But if you were a nonpartisan voter, you could vote for the presidential race. The rest of the races in California are all open primary anyway, so it didn't matter. It was only so then you could get the Democratic full ballot, the crossover Democratic ballot, or the nonpartisan ballot. So if you're a nonpartisan voter, you come in, you have to get one of those three, and they may run out of one. So that's why they were using whiteout, so that they used the wrong ballot. They said the only reason we used whiteout was so that we could white out the if somebody used the wrong ballot. So if you go into a precinct, the wrong precinct, they're going to have the ballot for that area. And if you're in the wrong precinct, you went to a different area, you may not be able to vote for some of those people in that area because you don't live there. And so then they'd have to, with these stupid machines, they'd have to wipe those out. Okay. But now what they're doing in California, and this is coming up, there's only, I think, 4 or 6 counties, I think 6 counties that have started what they're calling the Voters' Choice Initiative. You know, when you hear something like that, Voters' Choice, you know that it probably means the voter not choice, you know. They name things opposite. But it was pretty good in some ways, but it's sort of a mixed bag. In other words, what you're going to be able to do is go to any precinct that you want, and you can vote in any place. So you can choose where you want to vote. That could be really good in a place like Los Angeles, where you may be at work, and to get home in time may be nearly impossible because you have to fight traffic all the way home. And so you'd rather just vote there. What they're doing, though, is they want to make them big voting centers so that you would have many precincts in one voting center, and then there'll be full service voting centers. The good side to that is they're going to leave them open much longer, like maybe 10 days. I mean, they're going to have you can vote for a long time before election day. You can go to these voting centers anytime you want, anyone that you want, and hopefully that'll encourage more voters to come in. On the other hand, you know, you have the downside, which is a lot of people may want to just walk down to their local precinct and vote and kind of be part of the community and see, you know, their friends and stuff that are voting. And, you know, there's something about that that's good. So it's a double-edged sword. That's coming up in the future. I think just a few small counties are going to be trying it this coming season.
It is shocking that we have so many different systems for all of these different precincts in different states, but it also might not be great if we had uniform machines all across. So I think you talked about this in one of your videos. Just if you mentioned, I think it was was it Diebold machines, or, you know, what are the problems with the, you know, federal, like DHS taking over and having a system like that?
Well, that's, you know, I do worry when they say that they're going to make the voting information you know, critical infrastructure, and that we're going to put really tight controls on it, because that means to me that maybe they're going to be keeping us from the information, and that's going to make it easier for fraudsters to rig things. There is an argument that's made that by having various machines and different kinds of methodologies, that makes it more secure. I'm of the notion that I don't trust any machine nor any people. So I don't trust anything. So basically, we have to be able to, after the fact, go in and check something to validate what happened. And the citizens have to be able to do this. This is why citizens oversight is, you know, the concept of that, even that word, is that we as citizens have to provide that oversight. No one else can do it for us. And we have to be able to have enough information. And that's why the ballots, if we can get to them, and it makes it easier if the ballot, we can get to the ballots, but also we have access to the ballot images because we can process those really fast. You know, if I get a ballot.
How does that work out? I've been trying to ask that question. Why are the images so much easier to process?
Because if you give me paper, I have to sit there and hand count it. You know, I have to leaf through the paper. If you give me the ballot images, I can just submit it to a machine and have it detect where the you know, bubbles are you know, colored in, and do a complete 100% audit of all of the images. Now we'd have to still go back in, as the point was made, and double check that indeed the ballot images match the paper. There's some schemes in there that I don't want to even try to get into now that makes it really hard to you know, stuff the images in. because then you would detect that. But the point is that the images, if we have the images, it actually locks it in. Like, let's say you have just ballots and then you have a flood. Oh, the ballots are destroyed. What if somebody goes in there with a pencil and starts changing them? How do we know? Well, the ballot images can't very easily be changed. If you say, here's the ballot images and here's a bunch of ballots, which ones do I trust more? Well, if you ask me, I almost trust the ballot images more because they're locked into place, very hard to change compared to just bringing in a pencil. So, we saw this thing, down in Alabama or no, it was Virginia, where, there was off by 1 vote. And it looks like somebody just colored the damn thing in.
Mm-hmm.
And
in Broward County, though, that's what they do have, the images, but they destroyed the paper ballots. And I guess there's concern there. So, yeah, it's a very complicated issue. It doesn't seem like
it had, I think, I talked to Tim Canova over coffee when I was down there in Florida, and they didn't submit the contest in time, even though now, as I've been working through this, in California at least, the laws are, and they're different in every state. This is the other problem. The laws are all different.
Mm-hmm.
But they probably should have gone in with to contest that election early on. And they didn't do that. They didn't file that thing. And they did have this sort of last minute, they wanted to get to the ballots and couldn't. They still had the ballot images. I don't know if they went through and did an audit of the ballot images. I mean, did they actually go through and count them all? I mean, the nice thing about ballot images, you can put them on a website and you can let everybody look at them. Mm-hmm. And count them if you want, go through and look at them all. I get it. You get you split them up. If you have you have a crowdsource, you have on the internet, you get 100,000 people looking at the ballots, you can get them done lickety-split just by looking at them. Mm-hmm. So it really, really helps to have the ballot images, and then you can look at them as a group. You can have, like they did in Wisconsin, they had the website, they look at every single ballot on video. You could compare it with the ballot image and look at the ballot right there. But having the ballot images was then, those were documented, and then they could look at them online. And then you can say, well, I don't agree with this spot right here, and it should be like that, and so forth. So you can discuss it, having a discussion. So the plan that I had, which I was putting forward, I didn't really describe yet, back in 2008, which was to get the ballot images, have them in a format where anybody could go in and get them all, but then have a system where different people could produce their result. So you say, this ballot, here's the vote. That's called the cast vote record, exactly how it was voted. Next ballot, here's what I think it said. Here's what I think that one said, all the way through every single ballot. You have a next guy, he does exactly the same thing. For every ballot, he says what they look like. Then you compare them. You're going to agree on almost all the ballots are going to be the same. You disagree on a few of them, then you look at them. And you decide which ones to rectify. Why don't you agree?
It sounds like a very time-consuming process, too. No.
This is something that a Google server can do lickety-split. When you do a search on Google, they split that up amongst 10,000 processors. You can do one of these. You could get an election done in probably a second, to review all of the ballots that they have now. They make it sound like it's so hard. No, you could review all the images electronically and figure out what the result is. You could have different people do it and then compare. Done. And then you find out which ones you don't agree on, and you can look at those. Now, I'm still saying we got to still go back and look at paper, and it's going to happen that if it gets really, really tight, you're going to be going in and looking at paper. But if it's not, if it's way off, and I have the ballot images, which, as I said, I think are actually sometimes more trustworthy than the paper, because you can't modify them very easily, then we can check these elections. I think that was sort of a dream of mine, how to do it if everybody was cooperative. But we don't have cooperative people out here. They want to do their own thing. They want to make it hard, and they want to keep things so that they can. Obviously, they want to keep things so that they can still continue to rig these elections. They want to, as you see, the rigging on the front end, how long it takes to get registered. Make it hard to get in. You make it so that you have to have an ID. Oh, NRA card, National Rifle Association. Oh, you get in that with that, but not the ID card from the university. That doesn't count. This is a sort of rigging on the front end to try to get people away. Then they did the cross check. You've heard about that, where they compare the names. Yeah, that we just compare first and last name, not middle or social security number. Well, then you're going to get a lot of hits, and especially on ethnic groups like John Lee, or something like that, or like Jackson or something. Don Jackson is you're going to have many people with apparently the same name, but are different people, and they would not. And they said, well, there's these millions of people that are fraudulently voting, blah, blah, blah. We haven't seen, I had people come up to me and they said, Ray, I want you to look into this. I'm really suspect of this voter. We think fraudulent voters, we think it's been, and every time we looked into it, we could not find that. We never found a bunch of, enough fraudulent voters to really turn any election. So this thing that, the Trump voter suppression group that was up there trying to do that. That's basically a voter suppression campaign. It is to say we want to have really tough IDs. Now, look, I'm not against voter IDs. I think it's fine as long as everybody can get them easily. If you don't have, if someone says I don't have a birth certificate, you got to make it so they can get their ID. And maybe, hey, get this idea. Maybe we should have a better Social Security card than that piece of crap paper. I mean, who came up with the piece of paper for a Social Security card? Somebody that says, oh, we don't want any numbers tracking us. But it would be kind of good to have a number that you can say, this is my number, and on a card that is indelible, and it's something that you can use as an ID card. Why don't they want that? Well, because then we'd be able to go get health insurance, not health insurance, but health care from the government, the way we probably should have it and so forth. Here's my health card. Remember when they tried to do that? Hillary Clinton said, we're going to have a health card. They went berserk. We can't have that.
Well, we also talk about front end sort of rigging. We have the media, they called California the night before. And so,
and this was the thing, is that it looked like, at least in San Diego, they had rigged the early vote by mail ballot so it would look like Hillary would win.
Do you still have that chart on one of your live streams that you did? You had a sort of chart that showed that total flip. It was like 60-40 in the early vote count, and then it completely flipped later.
Put this thing on because I find it works better. No reflections if I have that. So this is kind of a way I've used, and you can see big picture here. There's these 4 sets of ballots, and this top one, well, really the first one to come in is this early vote by mail ballots here. These are the ones that are received and processed by election night. Okay, so those are the ones that are reported at 8 p.m. In San Diego, this is the actual number for the primary, 292,000 ballots in this group. And the polling place ballots were only 195,000 fewer. People voted at the polls than just the early vote by mail. The later vote by mail ballots were 210,000, a little bit less than these, but still more than the polling place ballots. And then finally, about 10% of them, or 75,000, were the provisionals. And that wasn't that unusual of a number, it turns out. We thought they would have, many, many more provisionals in that election due to what I was talking about. But it turns out it wasn't appreciably that much more. So the thing is that this dividing line here, this top group is all they want to include in the audit. And this is what they report on at the end of election day, like the next day. Of course, the media wants to be able to report on California, instantly. They like to, do the dog race thing. that night and figure out what it is.
So
these down here are not processed for weeks. So we don't really get the result for weeks later. This first batch here was when they had Hillary Clinton winning by a landslide. So what would happen then is that you would have Bernie Sanders folks go, okay, we've lost. Bernie says, I'm giving up, throwing the towel at the convention. I'm giving into, I'm endorsing Hillary. Had he known that it was almost, and that this group here was probably wrong and fixed, so that even though this was a landslide, she only won by 3.75% in San Diego.
It was like 60-40 or something, or 60-some.
Yeah.
64.
This doesn't represent it very well, and I didn't make a hard thing for the other graphic that I have, which shows you the different amounts for each of the candidates. But essentially, So this first group that came in was like 58 to 42 for Hillary, and in the polls ballots is pretty much the other way around. It was 58 Bernie, 42. This group was 50-50, and then this was a landslide for Bernie Sanders, like 66 to 34. So had this not been quite as much of a landslide, Bernie Sanders didn't have to win this. It just had to be not quite as much of a flip. Then he would have won San Diego. That wouldn't have won California, but I think you never know what would have happened in the calculus for what a candidate would do. Because then they say, well, I might win California if I wait, because it was weeks later. You know what they did at this last election also is they moved up the conventions. They used to occur in September. They moved them up to July. So we had no time to contest anything.
Right.
This is a problem here where we have the parties, the political parties. What else happened? We had the DNC, as we know now from the Podesta emails and stuff, the WikiLeaks emails, that they were pushing Hillary over Bernie pretty heavily and biased that way, mostly because they were making money off Hillary, I think. But of course, then they said, well, it was the Russians who leaked those. Doesn't appear to be the Russians that leaked the Podesta emails. I thought it was an inside job by the guy at the DNC. What's his name that was killed he was shot in the park. And they said it was about, what is his name?
Seth Rich.
Yeah, Seth Rich. Yeah, maybe he was the guy who did it. So there was a lot of slime going on in this election. And so would that slime reach all the way into people running the elections? I think maybe there's a very good chance it did. And by the looks of this, they may have said to Vu, who they probably have something on. Why? Because he was busted in Ohio. Two of the subordinates were convicted, but then it was reversed on appeal. I mean, and I know that this guy, they're probably saying, okay, if you don't do what we tell you, then we're going to, bust you for these other things. So they may have this on him, and maybe that's the reason why he's doing it amongst these other people. But they all seem to be conspiring. The California Association of Clerks and Elections Officials works to gut the audits and do things wrong over and over and over. It's just amazing. They're a secretive group. They do things like they just had this AB 2125 that came out of the blue. Just yesterday, they finally revealed what they're working on with the. So that's what we're trying. So it is a battle. It's not over, folks. We have to continue to work on this.
Is that where? I'm sorry, you were at the Future of Elections conference. Is that where you're? ABH 40. Okay.
The Future of Elections conference. That's pretty much where the elections officials go for this little sort of mini convention. It's not the official Clerks and Elections officials meeting, but it is a most of the people there are the clerks and election officials, folks, or government workers, or there's a few people there like League of Women Voters and Common Cause. Good folks on the other side. There, though, you had Alex Padilla give his speech, and then you had Dean Logan give his, and I called out Dean Logan, saying, why did you push to gut? Oh, we're getting everything better in California. Then why did you push this AB 840 through to gut the audits? And again, looking at this picture here, what they did was they're supposed to include a sample, 1% sample of all of the ballots. That's what the law says. And they said, well, we're just going to cut it off here. We're only going to do this top part. Bad news, because if you're a hacker, you can identify these ballots, and you can just say, oh, okay, free reign on all these. So I'll fix all those however I want. No one will ever know. And so it's bad, bad, bad. I will admit, the problem here is that the 1% manual audit that they're doing now is an onerous task. It's very time consuming, and they're not even doing it right anyway, so I can see why they don't really think they need to do it. But essentially, again, if we get those ballot images, we can hold their feet to the fire. Otherwise, as I said, I just don't trust. If they say we're going to do the risk limiting audit, that's fine, but I'm afraid we're not going to have enough visibility of what they're doing.
So Ray, you talk about this as a battle. Do you think this can be won? Do you think there's any chance at all of having nationwide election integrity?
Yeah, I think so, because it's going in that direction, but very, very slowly. In other words, the new elections equipment that they're coming out with now, without exception, does take image, quick, because it's so easy to make a snapshot of a piece of paper. You don't have to have any smarts to do that. It's kind of like an eagle is really good eyes, but he can't read. Okay, eagles are smart in terms of just looking and seeing that rabbit or whatever. So in terms of taking the picture, we've got technology that will take that picture really easy and cast it into an image. And then you have the liberty of working on, is that spot colored in? Is it check marked? Because you have to have, there's standards, like California has a set of standards for how you're going to interpret the bubble, how the marking. If somebody just colors in a bubble nicely, of course you know what that is. But what if they check mark it? Well, you would think they should interpret that as a check. What if they cross it out and then color in the other one, put no and yes? You have to be able to say, well, they intended that one to be it, because they wrote yes next to it. Even though that's an invalid marking on the ballot, they say it's okay, in certain cases to do that. I mean, they're making exceptions of that nature. So there's a set of standards about how to interpret voter intent, of what the voter intended to do. And you have the machines can do a better job now than what they had before. What they had before was just a few, sensors, photoelectric detectors that would shine a light and they detect it. They only had about 5 or 6 across the page. The page would go through and it would hit those spots, and if it was off a little bit or something they wouldn't quite get, it was a mess. Now they just take a picture of the whole page in high resolution, and you can have a computer go through and carefully see where the ballot is. I mean, look at your cell phone. It can sit there and figure out where your face is. I mean, we're to the point now where, yes, we have the technology to do this, and we can interpret what these ballots say. We can drive a car on the road and have autonomous driving. We certainly can interpret a ballot. The problem here is not that. The problem is not can they do it. The problem is can we get that to happen and still trust it? Remember Volkswagen. Volkswagen had a system that under test looked like it was legitimate, and then they would flip into another mode and they would go and cheat. So we have to realize that even though these systems may be tested, they can go into a cheating mode. We have to be able to get back to the basic ballots and be able to check that. So will it ever, I think there's a good chance. I mean, you know, I could be wrong, you know, maybe it isn't possible, but look, we have to be able to try to do this or we don't have a democracy. And essentially every other issue goes to the wayside if you can't get this right. You know, forget campaign financing doesn't mean anything right now because they can fix it down at the level of the ballot. You think about you're working on some other issue, this or that, it doesn't mean anything until we get this right, because we're not going to be able to get these people into office. Now, even if we get the wrong people in office, though, I still claim we're not doing the right thing by not going and holding their feet to the fire, by going to meetings and making sure that we watch every little thing that they do. We made so much progress here in our local area. I'm near San Diego. By doing that, by just saying, okay, we're going to have people adopt a meeting. Yeah, we can't get anybody elected in this area. Perhaps it's an area which is very lopsided. We couldn't get anybody in that area, but we could go to the meeting and we could say no to something that would have happened otherwise. In fact, they were running these videos at this local city here for 4 years, for 2 hours a day, indoctrination videos for the party there. And I said, in one letter, I said, I don't think these videos are appropriate. They pulled them that day, never to run again. But we said, we got to go in 4 years ago. Had we been there 4 years earlier, we could have said no then. And they wouldn't have run for 4 years.
Well, it's, as you said, it's the eyes. Just knowing
it's the eyes. We have to have, there's no way around it. See, this is a different, you know, they talk about cybersecurity. Remember what cybersecurity normally means is that you have trusted insiders, say inside a company, and then you have firewalls and other things to keep the bad guys out. That's the usual paradigm. And then you have usual security. So what you do is encrypt it. You have a good guy in one area that is trusted. He encrypts it and it goes over to another trusted area, gets decrypted on the other side. What if you don't trust those people? Nothing works then. So what we have is a system here in this election thing where we can't trust the people. The only people we can really trust are the general public. The general public has to be, what it comes down to essentially is that we have to be able to, as a whole, watch this thing going on. And it doesn't take a lot of people, though. As I said, even one person in a state can coordinate. We'll help you. We'll help you to identify which counties to do it. You send a few emails. They have to send you the information, and then you can compare it. No one's doing that, though. You know, we need 175 is a lot to do, and each thing is different. You know, as I say, don't underestimate, even try to think about what your group is doing, what they're doing wrong. Just go in and start looking, because then you're going to see, okay, what are they doing with the whiteout? Why is the shredding truck out here? I mean, we saw all this stuff.
I remember seeing both of those. So the video of the whiteout.
Yeah, right. The whiteout, and we still in the lawsuit we had them testify. They admitted, and we said, you know, do you have any procedures, reports, logging? Nothing. And then they said, yeah, but you can go in and pull the whiteout tape off and see if it's, you know, done right. But essentially, who's doing that? No one is doing it. And when we try to go in and look at the ballots, they won't let us do it. So we're pushing, like San Diego is kind of ground zero, I think, for a lot of these things, because we have a really slimy person in there. It's a very big district. It's number, I think, 5 in the nation. They still have paper ballot. They have paper ballots, which is good, but they have old equipment. So, but it's tending that way. Now, let me give an example of a place that does it pretty well. Orange County does do ballot images. They're very, very good. I mean, right now it's not legal for them to turn them over, but we're working on that. And so if we can get them, then we can do this secondary check. I don't think there's any way they can fight that, you know, because you have the evidence is there. The ballots are there. You know, we should be able to check that and verify the election if we have those paper ballots. But if they use paper ballots but don't check them, then are we better off? You know, no, not unless we have people that checks them. And the election officials, they're not going to check them and say, I screwed up. And when is that going to happen? They should have third parties checking it. But even then, can you trust a third party? See, the only people that you can trust is the general public. And I think have a bunch of groups. Have groups check each other. This is why I say, you get the ballots, you have a system for checking. You have a bunch of people do the election again, not just one, but a bunch of them, all compare and then all agree. And then you can sort of fight it out as a group because you can't trust anybody. The thing is, yeah, go ahead.
So I actually talked to Lulu Freistadt about some of this, and she did talk about that, you know, doing the public audits where you could like just have it up on a screen and show people. And I also sat in on, do you know about a group, Secure Our Vote? Have you done any work with them? I sat in on, I just listened in on a call where they were discussing stuff, and she called in to ask some questions. I just wondered if you've worked with them. And
I've worked with a lot of places. I mean, it's interesting that back in 2004, it was 2000 they had the big deal with the hanging chads in Florida, and in 2004 they had to implement it suddenly a whole bunch of electronic machines, and that was just a complete fiasco. And we had a huge number of election integrity groups at that time. Almost all of them disappeared. And so it's hard to keep track of who they are. There's primarily there's a couple of different paradigms that these groups, champion. And one of them is the all hand counted paper ballot group. I'm not in that group because I know that I think it's fine if you had really small counties. Like, for example, Iowa has 99 counties, okay, but they only have as many people as San Diego County. So they have, in that 99, you can have those 99 counties doing their own little elections, and it distributes it out. It's not as risky. Yeah, if you had a hand counting of a simple ballot in the precinct, but look, we've looked at these precincts and how bad they are in terms of just adding things up. We had 1,500 precincts in San Diego, more or less, and we did a study of 5% of those. And in those 5%, only out of these 85 precincts, only 15% of them could add up the ballots that they had, how many were voted, and how many were spoiled, and have it equal out. I mean, they couldn't even get that to add up. 85% of the time, it didn't balance. So do I have a lot of trust in these election workers that have been there for like 15 hours to actually count the votes at every precinct? No. But if you did that, in a way, it would be good, because it's very hard to corrupt a whole bunch of precincts if they're hand counting the ballots out in the precincts. It's hard to corrupt those. It's very, very hard to watch, though. I mean, if you're an election integrity worker and you want to try to watch what's going on, you can't watch 1,500 precincts. You can barely get enough people to do that. And the trend is, as I said, to go to these voting centers. The trend is to consolidate into just a few big machines doing it. Colorado has central count voting. Central counting for the entire state. It goes to one place, they count them all. That's an example. And the risk limiting audits in this new bill that came through does bring up an issue. And let me explain it really quick. If you have risk limiting audits, what you're trying to do is pull ballots out in the ballot level risk limiting audit. They randomly choose ballots from the entire set. And if you do that in an individual county, but if it's a statewide race, the statewide race may be closer. Like if it's a blue county, maybe landslide blue, but it may have a red county landslide red. But when you add them up, it could be just a hair's breadth away. You'd have to actually choose more ballots if that was the case in all those counties involved. So it kind of pushes it toward a central count if you use that. This is why I do like risk limiting audits, because it explains what you do if you are getting a bad result. But because now they don't do anything, they just do a 1% manual tally, they say everything's fine and move on. And in fact, as I said, Dean Logan doesn't even do it right. Actually, most of them don't.
Well, I'm 100% with you on. I think, obviously none of these other things that we're fighting for matter if we don't have fair elections. So, and it's definitely, it's a bipartisan issue. The person.
It is. It's a nonpartisan issue.
Yeah, nonpartisan. Sorry.
And it is something that, but it does get parsed a little bit differently. You'll hear usually the right wingers talk about voter fraud.
Right.
Okay. And they think that a whole bunch of illegal aliens are voting in California. I mean, hell, we can barely get people that are legitimate voters to vote. It's the chances that you have a lot of illegal voters coming in and voting is almost nil.
Right. Well, I think we have another split on the left, if you will, of whether it's Putin or it's internal. So
well, that's true. I think that actually the Putin thing was derived by the DNC to cover up their malicious behavior, which was pretty disgusting to be sure. And I don't know, as I say, these organizations, the fact that the conventions were moved up to July, they're usually in September. What was the effect of that? It turned over the election so that nobody can contest anything. It turned it over to the conventions to settle it. And the election officials say those are the parties. We don't really have much to say about these primaries,
right? Because
it's up to the parties to decide it. They can actually do it any way they want. They can go in there and just king the person, crown the person that they want in any fashion that they want.
Well, people like you are not going to let that happen. So I would actually really like to follow up with you. You said there will be a decision on May 10th. What was that again? That's
okay. So we have been trying to get to the ballots in San Diego. We put in, it was remarkable because we put we filed a contest to the election within the 5 days after the election, that it says, but the election code is such a shambles. It's hard to know what's what. Also, it's hard to find attorneys that know anything about this area of law. It is very much not a very well defined area, and they keep changing it. The legislature changes the code all the time. So getting an attorney that knew what to do, basically I had to do everything for the attorney except that he knew how to turn the crank and get it through the system. And then we won that lawsuit, but in the process we learned that this early vote by mail ballots, which were included in the audit, were mishandled with 40 workers for a week to pre-stack them, and there's whiteout, and it didn't match the results, So we found that later, and then we reactivated the contest kind of late, but I think it's still legitimate and it's still a valid contest. But the problem was no one could tell me what to do. The attorney that was first working on it, he didn't know what to do. And I said, well, what do we do? We filed it. What's next? What do you do here? And then after an incredible amount of study on my own part to try to understand what the election code was all about, I realized that there's two things. There's a recount, which is an administrative process, and there's a whole bunch of stuff that explains it on the Secretary of State's website for handling a recount. Anybody can ask for it. You say, I want to have a recount. It doesn't go through the court. But there's this other thing called a contest, which is a court process, legal. Okay. And then you go into the court and you have to file the legal paperwork. So just recently, after not being able to get to the ballots in other ways, such as a public records request, I finally put in this discovery request in the right way, I hope, which is it takes 30 days. So we're going to have until about April, the beginning of April is when the 30 days runs out. And then I file a motion with the court to say that I want the court to compel them to provide access to the ballots. And the hearing for the motion is set now for May 10th, tentatively.
Okay.
So, basically things could happen between them. So it isn't a hardcore thing, because if they say all of a sudden, okay, you can come in and see the ballots, then
watch for the shredder truck.
Yeah, watch for the shredder truck.
Yeah.
Well, just the fact that we're learning about how to do it means that now we know more about, at the end of an election, I'm almost always going to file a contest, because then it allows me, if I want to go in and look at the ballots.
And
if
so
I can get through this.
People could go to Open Ballot Initiative, right? Is that
it's actually citizensoversight.org is if you go to citizensoversight.org, the main page there, and there's a place to also sign up. We had the Eyes Open campaign. We had the picture of the eyes, and we'll reactivate that for this election season, and actually need to ramp that up right about now. So I appreciate you having me on your show. So that
people in other states and other places could just do what you're doing, right?
Absolutely, and that's why we have a set of procedures that we've developed and training videos, so that you can, there's only a few key things that you have to do, and it's best if you can go in like that. If they're doing an audit in your state, in your county, like for example in Florida, was one of the ones that we targeted, and then we choose the top, say, 20% of the counties in the state. And let me give you an example. In California, the top 24 counties comprises 92% of the voters. There's 58 counties, so we don't have to do the other 34 if we get 92% of the voters and the first 24 counties. So other states may not be that lopsided, but it's still, important to strategize on what you should do, so you don't waste your time.
Right.
So what we do is we ask for the election result. In Florida, they actually have the final results. Just a second.
So I think this would be a great thing if any of our CFAR activists or just anyone watching wants to get involved with this. And
absolutely. We had a few hundred people sign up last time. And we're going to try to get maybe a few thousand signed up this time, because it takes that many to really do it. I mean, we have, just Texas has 365 counties. I mean, but we're going to pick the top, county. But if you're in Texas, if you're in Florida, if you're in these states, not all of them have an audit, but you can still, you can still go into your district and eyes open. But if you're in the state that has audits, then you can ask for the data, and if you can get people to go in with a video camera to the random selection meeting is the key time, because we need to have people that are watching that as they're selecting them randomly. Very, very key in Florida, because they only choose one random race. But if they choose that very randomly, nicely, then that can be, quite a force against someone a fraudster who's trying to, if they know that, but what they're doing is a hat, they put things in a hat. You can almost see their finger in there, holding the piece of paper that they want to pick, and then they pick it out, or had in their pocket. It was crazy. The judges were involved in all this. You can see the video at Citizens Oversight on YouTube, and see what we were up against there in Palm Beach County. This is like a Trump area, I guess. And the election official was actually from Escondido, right here in California, and moved out there.
Well, that's why I say, it is nonpartisan, and whether you were for Bernie or Hillary, whatever this time around, just remember that this could be, against the person you want next time. It's not about party here. This is about democracy.
Absolutely, and this is the nice thing about it. And actually, this is the thing we find about most local issues are very nonpartisan. It has nothing to do with party at the local level. People understand the issue. They all come together. Here is actually a local issue. Watching the elections and making sure that they're right and honest. There's nothing partisan about that.
Absolutely.
But it gets partisanized because you have people that are trying to tweak the system. And it happens from both sides. Both of the parties are tweakers.
Right.
And so there's nothing where you say, well, this party is faultless. No.
Right.
All the parties are involved here. And the big parties especially are look very corrupt and you know, they say, well, that's an election official as a Democrat. I said, well, that doesn't mean a thing. Actually doesn't mean a thing.
Right.
And some of the ones that are the best are the Republicans. I'll hand that to them. You know, in the Republican district, some of these are doing a really good job. It's crazy and backwards, upside down in every possible way. But if you go to citizensoversight.org, there's a sign up. And sign up, give your information about which district you're in. And then we'll have people who will, and if you want to help volunteer to organize as volunteers, I really would appreciate that. Somebody who's good at that, you can have them organize the volunteers and put them together, because sometimes you'll have maybe 20 people in one state. They've never met each other before, right? But want to do this, and they make friends, and it's fun. So it's a great thing to do. It's just really fun to do too. I mean, go in there with the camera.
Right.
I'll tell you, I've been in there with a camera. They have to let you in to certain areas with the camera to see what's going on. Ask questions. You're allowed to do that. California has an election code. You're allowed to ask questions. They're required to give you an answer or find someone that can. That's pretty powerful. So it is a thing where people don't know that they're pretty powerful here if they will learn what their power is as they go and do this.
And first have to know there's a problem. So, all right. Well, I would love to follow up with you on after May 10th. So thank you so much, Ray, for coming on. This is like the most important issue I think we have right now, and everyone, if you can get involved, please do.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ray. All right. Good night.
Good night.